Jeff Bezos just wrote an $11 billion check. And with that single move, the most dangerous space race in human history just got a whole lot more dangerous. On April 14th, 2026, Amazon officially announced that it would acquire Globalstar, a satellite communications company, for approximately $11.57 billion. This was not a routine business acquisition. This was a declaration of war, a direct, deliberate, and enormously expensive challenge to Elon Musk's Starlink, the satellite internet empire that has spent years building an advantage that most people believed was simply impossible to overcome. To understand why this deal shook the entire technology and space industry simultaneously, you need to understand what Globalstar actually is and what Amazon is really buying with $11 billion. Globalstar is not a new company. It has been operating since the 1990s and built its business around mobile satellite services, connecting people in remote locations where no cell tower could ever reach. It currently operates roughly 24 low Earth orbit satellites, a network that sounds small but carries something far more valuable than its size suggests. Globalstar holds a globally harmonized spectrum portfolio, including L-band and S-band frequencies, band 53 and N53 spectrum, and potential C-band optionality. In the world of satellite communications, spectrum is not just an asset. It is the foundation on which everything else is built, and Globalstar's spectrum licenses are recognized across dozens of countries around the world. There's another reason Globalstar's name will be familiar to hundreds of millions of people who have never thought twice about satellite technology. If you own an iPhone or an Apple Watch, you have already been using Globalstar's infrastructure. Apple invested approximately $1.5 billion into Globalstar in 2024 to power the emergency satellite SOS feature built into its devices. That feature, which allows iPhone users to send distress messages and share their location via satellite when there is no cellular signal available, runs on Globalstar's network. Apple's investment gave the tech giant a 20% equity stake in Globalstar. So when Amazon announced it was buying Globalstar, the immediate question everyone asked was what happens to Apple's stake? And more importantly, what happens to the millions of iPhone users who depend on that service? Amazon addressed this directly. The company stated that it would continue supporting iPhone and Apple Watch models currently using Globalstar's satellite network. Amazon also announced that it intended to collaborate with Apple on future satellite services, using what Amazon is now calling Amazon LEO, its rebranded low Earth orbit satellite division, formerly known as Project Kuiper. FCC Chairman Brendan Carr, speaking to CNBC on the day of the announcement, said that the regulatory body was very open-minded about the acquisition, which analysts interpreted as a positive signal that regulatory approval, while not guaranteed, was unlikely to become a fatal obstacle. But the real story here is not about Apple, and it is not even entirely about Globalstar satellites. It is about where this deal fits in the larger battle that Bezos and Musk have been fighting for years, a battle for control of the orbital layer of the internet, the invisible infrastructure that may ultimately determine who controls global communications for the next century. Elon Musk's Starlink entered April 2026 with approximately 10,000 satellites in orbit. 10,000. That number is not just impressive, it is civilization-altering. Starlink currently serves millions of customers across more than 100 countries, providing broadband internet to homes, ships, aircraft, military units, and remote communities that have never had reliable connectivity in their entire history. Starlink represents somewhere between 50 and 80% of SpaceX's total revenue, which means it is not just a side project. It is the financial engine that funds everything else Musk wants to do, including Starship, Mars colonization, and the long-term vision of making human beings a multiplanetary species. Amazon, before this deal, counted just over 200 satellites in orbit under its Amazon LEO program, formerly Project Kuiper. 200 satellites against 10,000. That gap is so large that even calling it a gap feels inadequate. It is a canyon, and adding Globalstar's 24 satellites to Amazon's 200 does not close that canyon in any mathematical sense. 224 is still nowhere near 10,000, but that framing misses the point entirely. The Globalstar acquisition was never about satellite count. It was about spectrum, technology, operational expertise, and the one capability that Amazon needs more than any other right now: direct-to-device service. This is the ability to connect a standard, unmodified smartphone directly to a satellite network without any special hardware or additional equipment. The user does not need a Starlink terminal. They do not need a dish on their roof. They need only the phone already in their pocket. Globalstar's spectrum, specifically its band 53 and N53 frequencies, is uniquely suited to enabling this kind of direct-to-device connectivity in a way that is more spectrally efficient and higher capacity than legacy approaches. By combining Globalstar's spectrum assets with Amazon, LEO's satellite manufacturing capabilities, and cloud computing infrastructure, Amazon is building something that did not exist before. A direct-to-device satellite network that can potentially reach every smartphone on the planet. This matters enormously because direct-to-device is where the entire satellite communications industry believes the next massive market lies. T-Mobile and SpaceX already announced a partnership to bring Starlink's direct-to-cell capability to T-Mobile customers. SpaceX acquired EchoStar's spectrum portfolio in a $17 billion deal, specifically to bulk up Starlink's direct-to-cell service. The race to connect every smartphone on Earth directly to satellites in orbit, without any additional hardware, is already underway. And Amazon just paid $11.5 billion to ensure it has a seat at that table. The scale of Amazon's ambition in this space is difficult to overstate. The company has a regulatory obligation to deploy approximately 1,600 satellites by a July 2026 deadline, set by the Federal Communications Commission as a condition of its original spectrum license. Its longer-term plan calls for deploying roughly 3,200 satellites to low Earth orbit by 2029. That is still less than a third of what Starlink has already built and launched. But Amazon's satellite manufacturing operation, combined with its extraordinary logistics capabilities and its Amazon Web Services cloud computing backbone, gives it advantages that no other Starlink competitor on Earth currently possesses. There is a painful irony embedded in Amazon's situation that the Globalstar deal does not fully resolve. Amazon needs rockets to launch its satellites, lots of rockets. Launching 3,200 satellites by 2029 requires an enormous, sustained, and reliable launch cadence. The company cannot simply rely on one provider. It has signed contracts with multiple launch companies, including United Launch Alliance and Arianespace, in addition to its own Blue Origin. But Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket, which made its debut in January 2025, is still in its early operational phase and has not yet reached the launch frequency that Amazon needs. That means Amazon is currently dependent on competitors and outside providers to launch its own constellation, which creates a strategic vulnerability that no amount of spectrum acquisition can fix. Analysts at AJ Bell noted bluntly that the Globalstar deal will not solve Amazon's rocket launch bottleneck. The long-term answer to that problem is Blue Origin scaling New Glenn to regular, high cadence operations. But that will take time, and time is the one resource that Jeff Bezos is running short of in this race. Starlink did not sit still while all of this was happening. In March 2026, just weeks before Amazon's Globalstar announcement, SpaceX confirmed that Starlink had crossed the 10,000 satellite threshold. The company continues launching batches of satellites at a pace that no other organization on Earth can match, using its own Falcon 9 rockets, which fly with a reliability and frequency that has no parallel in the launch industry. Musk has spoken publicly about eventually operating tens of thousands of Starlink satellites, creating a communications layer around Earth so dense and so redundant that it becomes practically impossible for any competitor to disrupt. The competitive dynamics here extend far beyond satellite internet for consumers. Both Amazon and SpaceX are competing for government and military contracts worth billions of dollars annually. The United States Space Force, the Department of Defense, and intelligence agencies have all been investing heavily in commercial satellite communications as a backbone for military operations that require connectivity in contested environments where traditional infrastructure can be targeted or destroyed. Globalstar itself had already signed a cooperative research and development agreement with the U.S. Army to evaluate its edge processing satellite solutions for defense applications, exploring how its compact, low-power devices could enable secure and autonomous communications in challenging military environments. By acquiring Globalstar, Amazon inherits those defense relationships and the credibility that comes with them. The broader picture that emerges from all of this is one of two men with vastly different resources, strategies, and timelines fighting for ownership of the communications infrastructure of the future. Musk moved first, moved fast, and built a lead that seemed insurmountable. Bezos moved slowly, invested carefully, and is now beginning to deploy the kind of financial force that only the world's largest e-commerce and cloud computing company can sustain. Neither man shows any sign of backing down, and neither company is running out of money anytime soon. Dan Coatsworth, head of markets at AJ Bell, said it plainly when the deal was announced. He said what was certain was that the space race was heating up and that big money was expected to be plowed into this industry over the coming years. That assessment may be the understatement of the decade. $11.5 billion for a satellite company with 24 satellites is not a purchase. It is a signal. It tells the entire market, every investor, every government, every technology company watching, that Amazon is not conceding the orbital internet to Elon Musk without the most expensive fight in the history of commercial space. To appreciate how dramatically this landscape has shifted, consider where things stood in 2020, Amazon had not launched a single Project Kuiper satellite. Blue Origin had never flown an orbital rocket. Starlink was a promising experiment with a few hundred satellites, and most analysts were skeptical it would ever become the global service Musk was describing. Fast forward to April 2026, and Starlink has 10,000 satellites in orbit, millions of paying customers, and a dominant position in the consumer and enterprise satellite internet market. What Musk built in 5 years is genuinely one of the most remarkable industrial achievements in modern history. But Bezos is not trying to replicate what Musk built. He is trying to build something different and, in some ways, smarter. Starlink requires a physical terminal, a small but real piece of hardware that users must purchase, set up, and maintain. That terminal costs money, requires installation, and creates a barrier to adoption that simply does not exist with a phone call or a text message. Amazon's strategy through the Globalstar acquisition is to bypass that barrier entirely. If Amazon Leo can deliver usable connectivity directly to the smartphone already in every person's pocket, it does not need to sell hardware. It can instead partner with mobile carriers, embed connectivity into existing devices, and reach billions of people through the phones they already own and the plans they already pay for. This is why Apple's continued involvement matters so much to the strategic picture. Apple's emergency SOS feature is already on hundreds of millions of iPhones worldwide. Every person who has bought a recent iPhone already has a small piece of Globalstar's network in their pocket. Amazon inheriting that relationship and committing to expand it through Amazon, Leo means that from day one of offering direct-to-device services, it could potentially reach more devices than any other satellite network on Earth. That is not a small advantage. That is the kind of structural head start that changes the outcome of entire markets. The financial scale of this deal also reveals how Bezos thinks about competition. $11.5 billion is significant by any measure, but for Amazon, which generated over $600 billion in revenue in 2025, it represents roughly 2% of annual sales. The company spent more than that on logistics infrastructure in a single quarter. For Bezos, this is not a desperate bet. It is a calculated investment at a scale Amazon can absorb comfortably while continuing every other part of its business without disruption. The same cannot be said for smaller competitors trying to enter the satellite internet space. The financial barrier to entry that this deal reinforces is one that startup rivals will find nearly impossible to overcome. There is also a geopolitical dimension to this competition that neither Amazon nor SpaceX can afford to ignore. China has announced its own plans for a massive low Earth orbit satellite constellation called Guoang, which aims to deploy more than 12,000 satellites. If that constellation reaches operational scale, it would rival Starlink in size and give the Chinese government a parallel global communications infrastructure operating entirely outside American control. Both Bezos and Musk understand that the satellite internet race is not purely a commercial contest. It carries direct implications for which country shapes the rules of global digital infrastructure for the next generation. An American loss in the orbital internet race is not just a business failure, it is a strategic retreat with consequences that go far beyond stock prices and quarterly earnings. The space race that began with rockets and astronauts and national pride has evolved into something far more consequential. It is now a race for the invisible layer of infrastructure that will connect the next 5 billion people to the internet, power the military communications of the world's largest armed forces, and ultimately determine who has the leverage to shape how information flows across the surface of this planet. Jeff Bezos just spent $11 billion to make sure that story does not end with only one name on the cover.